Thank you everybody, and thank you for inviting me to the conference today. I'm going to talk about the long-term transport needs. Planning transport takes time. If you want something built by 2030, you've got to start now. Our plan goes to 2030, the Mayor's Transport Strategy, but we're also working on one that takes us to 2050. We need to understand the challenges that will face us between now and then, and we need to understand the scale of growth that we have to deal with and how we can link land use and transport together in our planning. The first choice, though, in discerning our long-term plans is what's the spatial shape of London? What are we connecting together? We're not just building things for the sake of it. We need to understand who we're building it for and how it will connect. So first question, David's answered, how many people will be in London by 2050? Where will they work? Where will they live relative to now? And what will happen beyond London's boundaries? Those answers to those questions will help shape London and then help us shape how it can be determined. So, as David said, come sort of 2030, we've all heard the 10 million figure, population by 2030 because we're having babies, etc. But by 2050, it could grow to 11.4 million. This is huge growth on the network. This is like Birmingham coming to London. And as David said, much of that growth will actually occur in East London. So the darker the red, the more growth. But also the opportunity to house people in terms of where that growth will occur is largely in the opportunity areas, the yellow areas on our chart. And if you look at the green chart, the total land available in the east, some 10,000 hectares, is actually more than the summation of the areas available in the north, south and west. So big opportunities in the east to help house that growth. Also employment, where will people work? Will there be more jobs? We're predicting come 2036 there'll be an increase of 18% in jobs, but where will they be? Will they still be in central London? Well, much of the work that we are looking at shows that central London will still stay as this economics-like powerhouse. It's only 2% of the area. It houses sort of over 1 million jobs, and most of those jobs are 70% more productive than the average for the UK. We have looked to see how can that central area grow. Can you densify the central area if that's where people want to invest? Or can you expand that central area? And you're seeing signs of expansion already with the activity King's Cross, Paddington, activities sort of like in Vauxhall. That's a sort of expansion of the central area. Or could we actually actively encourage new centres to form, particularly in outer London, by creating sort of ears, I think they're like Mickey Mouse ears on top of a sort of like a central face, in places like Stratford, in places like Old Oak Common? Or should we try to sort of like create centres further away, hubs in outer London or beyond London? These are questions we have to ask in order to determine what the transport needs are going forward. We have looked at some of this in terms of the jobs, some of the jobs forecast for the central area. What if they were located outside of the central area? Is that a good idea? Well, certainly you could reduce the transport demands, but if you look at the nature of those jobs and the productivity of those jobs, and you relate employment density and productivity, then you're likely not to generate as much GDP. So it's a trade-off. So if you want to boost the economy, then most people want to come in the middle, and that's the demand that sort of like investors are placing us. As I said, homes, where are people going to live? We've got to build many, many more homes. We've also got to think about whether or not we need to increase densities in locations that exist already to house the number of people we're talking about. We can house 9 million people in London in the opportunity areas that we've spoken about, but we need to consider where we house the rest, because many more homes will be required. And we need to make sure if we are housing people in areas that currently aren't well served by public transport, how can we serve them by public transport? So more questions, which is, again, where will people live? If they're going to live in London, do we need to densify London further? Do we need to densify the outer areas? Do we need to think of new towns? Or do we have to look at growth outside of London in terms of densification of the ring, new towns beyond London, or sort of redevelopment of some of the existing towns around London? If we're going to do more densification in London itself, particularly if we're looking to outer London, we have to ensure quality of life, the sense of place is maintained. It's not just about shoving people in areas and changing those areas. We need to ensure we are providing good facilities for walking and cycling. We are providing local connections in the form of sort of good public transport. We are also ensuring that we are placemaking at the same time. People want to live in London because London's a wonderful place. And just because we're growing doesn't mean we shouldn't seek to maintain that sort of sense of place of London. But if you look at the growth in London where people can live, if you look at where sort of like some of the dominant jobs will be, it means we'll still continue with these increasing demands on our transport network of radial demands into central London. That's the sort of trend that we forecast will still happen, and we need to respond to that. So when I said that we're going to be 10 million people by 2030 and 11.4 million people by 2050, come 2050, what that means in terms of extra trips each day on the network is 10 million extra trips each day on the network, a 40% increase in trip making, 60% increase in what happens on the underground, 80% increase in terms of what happens on the rail network. So a big challenge, and we can try and spread the load, we can try and encourage more people to work from home, we can try and encourage people to travel later, etc., but that demand is still there. So for 2050, we need to consider if we're going to provide the modern, reliable system that everyone expects, we've still got to provide more links into central London. We've got to make sure those homes and jobs are connected across the city. We've got to unlock these big brown areas, opportunity areas across the country so people can be connected between jobs and homes. We've got to think beyond London, particularly world-class connections, and ensure that we are maintaining and improving the quality of life. So we have a big programme already in London in terms of Crossrail 1, we've got Thameslink, we've got all the tube upgrades, all that's happening, and we'll increase the sort of capacity across our network by 2031 to 30%. So big programmes all in train. And those programmes themselves will help actually support some of this growth of the CAS that I talked about at Paddington, King's Cross, Canary Wharf and London Bridge. They'll all be benefited from that. But much, much more is needed across London, particularly to 2050. And the economic vitality of London isn't just dependent on local connections, it's dependent on connections to the rest of the nation, to the rest of the wider southeast, and also abroad, increased connectivity globally. But just starting at the local level, when we're talking about houses, one of the things that we're doing, there's a site, 11,000 homes could be built in Barking Riverside if we connected that area to the rest of the network. So what we're proposing is an extension of the Barking Gospel Oak line, GOB line, with a rail link into that area so those homes can be built and people go and live there. That's the sort of thing that we want. We're also looking at the overground network and bits of rail network across London, where there's an opportunity to join them up more and create the sense of an orbital railway, another orbital railway around London, connecting growth areas, connecting town centres. Big, big scheme that we've started planning for, and I say we've started now and we'll get it done by 2029 if we keep our skates going fast, is Crossrail 2. Crossrail 2 is essential in terms of meeting the growing demand across central London, because all the things that we're improving in central London will soon get filled up again, but importantly opening up some of these new areas. So David referred to Meridian Water and Tottenham Hale. Crossrail 2 will go up the Upper Lee Valley and provide improved accessibility for people wanting to live in those areas to a wider range of jobs. And in the south west, it will help relieve many of the overcrowded southwest trains that come into London, so you've got a wider benefit for the wider region. We're also looking at whether or not we can extend the Bakerloo line extension into the southeast to increase opportunities there and join up some of the sort of growth areas that are proposed for housing people in the southeast. We're looking at additional overground connectivity in relation to schemes that are coming our way. So if HS2 comes to Old Oak Common and there's an opportunity for a big development site there, more homes, more jobs, then we want to make sure Londoners can readily get to it. So we want to make sure the overground that currently skirts around that area can be properly joined to that area with a new station, and whether or not the Crossrail 1 can be joined to the West Coast Main Line. So again, people in that wider western area can actually benefit from growth there. And we want to ensure if HS2 is coming that it's properly connected to HS1 with a fit-for-purpose link, not the thing that was in the bill before, but a proper connection which will enable not just the opportunities of getting to the continent, but opening up these regional opportunities for people to sort of travel. But it's not all about public transport. Roads play an important part in supporting growth as well. And when I talk about road space, I'm not talking about private cars. I'm talking about our road space is used for people to walk along, it's used for people to cycle along, it's used for buses to go along, it's used for goods and services to deliver, and it's used for people just to enjoy the space. So we have to ensure that there's adequate space for people to do these things which most people will support. But if we provide for all the space that's required to support those needs and we don't do anything else, then we will see congestion arise to greater levels than we've observed already. So we either need to manage some of that demand down, encouraging more home working, etc., or we need to consider whether or not there's a need for relocated space. So there's lots of stuff we're looking at to try and manage demand better, changing people's travel habits, looking at nighttime deliveries, whether the new emerging technologies will help in this regard. But if they don't, and I say the scale of growth is so huge, 10 million extra trips, we need to think whether we can provide additional space. And I say it's not for private vehicles to go whizzing around, it's taking certain vehicles off the surface, putting them underneath, so the surface can be used for the walking, for the cycling, for all the things that people want it used for. So we're looking for opportunities for having mini tunnels, cut and cover, and we're looking for new crossings. We have just commissioned a study to see if it's at all feasible to take some of the pressures off the inner ring road, where you've got Euston, King's Cross and all the growth around there, and put them in a tunnel elsewhere. So we think, is that feasible? Is it a sensible idea? Will it actually help London or not? We're also looking at new river crossings in the east, that big growth area that I talked about, where the north and the south currently is completely separated by water. So we'll be launching a consultation shortly on that. And I would be failing my other job if I didn't mention the fact we're looking for connectivity to the rest of the world. That we recognise that demand for air travel will grow, and the Mayor has advocated quite clearly that he'd like an airport located in the right location in order that growth can be properly supported. And if there was an airport in the Thames Estuary, and we're hoping that there will be, then there's a whole load of infrastructure that's needed to support that, but that same infrastructure will support the growth, particularly in East London. But we're not forgetting about reducing CO2 emissions. We're doing loads to tackle health and obesity, encouraging walking and cycling. We've got to make sure the systems that we develop going forward are accessible and safe. But all of this is going to cost a lot of money. Billions. We're talking about billions and billions of pounds. So lots of big ideas, and we need to be able to fund them. And we also need to goes back to basics and saying if we're going to fund them, perhaps the people who benefit from them should pay in some way and structure our sort of funding and finance accordingly. So the people who would benefit from all this investment in London, because it would give rise to increased GDP, are the national taxpayers, because they'd benefit from that, people who use our transport systems, and the businesses and developers who benefit from either us bringing workers in or the actual land values going up. So part of the long-term vision going forward is to ensure that we've got funding and finance models in place so that we can deliver this stuff. And we are, as David said, looking for devolution of funding to the Mayor so we can pay for it. We're looking at different ways in which we can raise taxes or extract value from land that will increase. But what we must do, if we're going to deliver this major plan to support London's growth, is make the case for change. Thank you.